Falkland War was a 10-week undeclared war between Argentina and the United Kingdom in 1982 over two British-dependent territories in the South Atlantic, the Falkland Island and its territory dependency South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands. The Falkland Island is an archipelago in South Atlantic Ocean on the Patagonian shelf. The principal islands are about 300 miles or 480 kilometers east of South American southern Patagonian coast and about 752 miles or 1,210 kilometers from the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. The archipelago, with an area over 4,700 square miles or 12,000 square kilometers, comprises East Falkland, West Falkland and 776 smaller islands. As a British overseas territory, the Falklands have internal self-governance and the United Kingdom takes responsibility for their defense and foreign affairs. The capital and largest settlement is Stanley on East Falkland. Argentina had claimed sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, which lie 300 miles east of its coast since the early 19th century, but Britain seized the island in 1833, expelling the few remaining Argentine occupants, and since then consistently reject Argentina's claim. In early 1982, the Argentine military junta, led by Lieutenant General Leopoldo Galtieri, gave up on long-running negotiation with Britain and instead launched an invasion of the island. The decision to invade was chiefly political. The junta, which was being criticized for economic mismanagement and human rights abuses, believed that the recovery of the islands would unite Argentinians behind the government in a patriotic favor. An elite invasion force trained in secrecy, but its timetable was shortened on March 19 when a dispute erupted on British-controlled South Georgia Island, where Argentine salvage workers had raised the Argentine flag 800 miles east of the Falklands. Naval forces were quickly mobilized. Argentine troops invaded the Falklands on April 2nd, rapidly overcoming the small garrison of British Marines and the capital Stanley, or Port Stanley. They obeyed orders not to inflict any British casualties despite losses of their own units. The next day, Argentine Marines seized the associated island of South Georgia. By late April, Argentina had stationed more than 10,000 troops on the Falklands, although the vast majority of these were poorly trained and they were not supplied with proper food, clothing and shelter for the approaching winter. As expected, the Argentine people reacted favorably, with large crowds gathering at the Plaza de Mayo in front of the presidential palace to demonstrate support for the military initiative. In response to the invasion, the British government under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher declared a war zone for 200 miles around the Falklands. The government quickly assembled a naval task force built around two aircrafts, the 30-year-old HMS Hermes and the new HMS Invisible Light Carrier, and two cruise ships pressed into service as troops carriers, the Queen Elizabeth II and the Canberra. The carriers sailed from Portsmouth on April 5 and were reinforced en route. Most European powers voiced support for Great Britain, and European military advisors were withdrawn from Argentine bases. However, most Latin American governments sympathized with Argentina. In addition, Argentine military planners had trusted that the United States will remain neutral in the conflict, but the following unsuccessful mediation attempt, United States offered full support to Great Britain, allowing its NATO ally to use its air-to-air missile communication equipment and other military stockpiles on British-held Ascension Island, as well as cooperating with military intelligence. On April 25, while the British task force was steaming 8,000 miles to the war zone via Ascension Island, a smaller British force retook South Georgia Island, in the process capturing one of Argentina's vintage US-made diesel-electric submarines. On May 2nd, the obsolete Argentine cruise General Belgrano, purchased from the United States after World War II, was sunk outside the war zone by a British nuclear-powered submarine. Following this controversial event, most of other Argentine ships were kept in port, and the Argentine Navy's contribution was limited to its naval air force and one of its newer German-made diesel-electric submarines. The latter posed more of a threat to the British fleet than was expected, launching torpedo attacks that narrowly failed. The Argentine cruiser General Belgrano sinking after being torpedoed by a British submarine on May 2, 1982. Meanwhile, the British naval force and the land-based Argentine air forces fought pitched battles. Argentine aircraft consisted mainly old US and French fighter bombers, armed only with a conventional high-explosive bombs and lacking electronic countermeasures or radar for accurate targets. That they proved as effective as they did was a testimony to the skill and motivation on their pilots. In addition, the Argentine Navy had recently taken delivery for a new French-made aircraft armed with the newest anti-ships missile. Though only a handful in number, these proved particularly deadly. Because the Falklands were at the extreme age of the Argentina aircraft's combat, the planes could take only one pass at the task force. British ships therefore remained out of range except when closing in to attack Argentine positions. For the British, the problem was their dependence on two aircraft carriers, as the loss of one would almost certainly have forced withdrawal. However, not all of them were armed with full anti-aircraft system or close-in weapons for shooting down incoming missiles. This left the British ships vulnerable to attack, and on May 4 the Argentines sunk the destroyer HMS Sheffield with a missile. The Argentines meanwhile lost some of 20–30% of their planes. The Argentines were unable to prevent the British from making an amphibious landing on the island. Apparently expecting a direct British assault, the Argentine Ground Forces Commander General Mario Mendez centralized his forces around the capital of Stanley to protect its vital airstrip. Instead, the British Navy Task Force Commander Admiral John Woodward and the Land Force Commander Major General Jeremy Moore decided to make their initial landing near Port San Carlos on the northern coast of East Falkland. From the beachhead at Port San Carlos, the British infantry advanced rapidly southward through forced march under extremely adverse weather conditions to capture the settlement of Darwin and Goose Green. After several days of hard fighting, some of it hand-to-hand against the termed Argentine troops dug in along several regional lines, the British succeeded in taking and occupying the high ground west of Stanley. With British force surrounding and blocking the capital and main port, it was clear that the large Argentine garrison there was cut off and could be starved out. Mendez therefore surrendered on June 14, effectively ending the conflict. The British captured some 11,400 Argentinian prisoners during the war, all of whom were released afterward. Argentina announced that about 650 lives have been lost, about half of them in the sinking of the General Belgrano, while Britain lost 255. Military strategists have debated key aspects of the conflict but have generally underscored the roles of submarine, both Britain's nuclear-powered vessel and Argentina's older diesel-electric craft, and anti-ship missiles, both air-to-sea and land-to-sea type. Argentina's military government was severely discredited by its failure to prepare and support its own military forces in the invasion that it had ordered, and civilian rules were restored to Argentina in 1983. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher converted widespread patriotic support into a landslide victory for her Conservative Party in the parliament election in 1983. Thank you for watching, guys. Thank you for your support. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, now you know.